Hello guys, good morning. So we are now in the financial controllership. Financial controllership is one of the major subjects in BSBA financial management major. And this is very important to know what is in the parlance of financial controllership, considering the fact that these concern more about control on the financial resources of the company. So as we see the definition, financial controllership is a management function that supervises the accounting and financial reporting of an organization. So meaning to say, when we say accounting, this involved on the process of recording financial transaction pertaining to a business. And financial reporting, somewhat like it deals on how the accounting department is transparent enough to disclose the accounting data. What is important here is that the accounting department will be able to disclose accurate and reliable reporting, because through the financial reporting they will be able to know the total performance of the business. So what is important in financial controllership is that you have to make this policy in order to protect the financial resources of the company. So it focuses on two things only, which is the accounting and financial reporting. So when we say financial controllership, the bottom line is that there is a policy on how you're going to implement that particular policy for the total protections of the money of the company. So this is financial controllership is to be managed by a financial controller. Kinsa man ni si financial controller? Financial controller is the highest accounting officer. So makaingon ta siguro accounting head ang pinaka-highest accounting officer. It's not, but it is the financial controller which is considered as the highest accounting officer, whose functions is to prepare the financial statements, draw up balance sheets, give cash flow reports, create budgets, so on and so forth. Everything that deals with the finances is the work of the financial controller. So it is responsible in the implementation and monitoring of internal controls. Why is it so? Because since financial resources is very tempting, we don't know that there are individuals in the organizations who manage to misappropriate funds. So what will happen if there is a weak internal control? So the money will be misappropriated. There is a lot of defalcation, the fraud, so on and so forth, because we cannot understand that if there are somebody else who wanted to mislead the organizations through getting cash in an illegal way. So that is why the financial controllership has been implemented in the organizations, just to determine how strong is the internal control of the company. So we need to know, is there a risk involved? Yes. There is always a risk in the implementations of internal control, because internal control actually is a continuous process. So what is a risk, by the way? So for all businesses, there is a risk that exists and that need to be identified and addressed in order to prevent or minimize the losses. So that is when the mga risk is very hard to identify. Somewhat like na ay mga risk that the money will be deposited to other account instead to the company's depository bank. There is also a risk wherein we don't know if the controller itself will be the one to mislead the money of the company. So that is why the internal control has been implemented, because this is somewhat like the awakening of everybody in the organizations to be watchful by each other. So risk is the threat that an event actions or non-action will adversely affect an organization's ability to achieve its business objectives and execute its strategies successfully. Risk is measured in terms of consequences and likelihood. So, may yung adversely affects, somewhat like we need to understand if the internal control of the company is so weak, there is a possibility that everybody would like to mislead the organization, especially those area employees who has the plan to manipulate money in the organizations, who has the plan to take money and put it in their own pocket. So what will happen if the company is not watchful with regards to their internal control? So, what will happen with the goal nga maingong kada if we have to establish a company, our primary goal is to have a huge profit. But if you have the weak internal control, of course, this will not be materialized. So, the following processes is used to assess risk: identifying risk, sourcing risk, and measuring the risk. Overall, you should focus on the high risk affecting our operations. So we need to identify the risk. Once you have identified the risk, it is now half solved. Because if you already identify the risk, the next move is that you must know what would be the source of that particular risk. If we know that the source of that risk, we will know how to counter for that particular risk. We will know how to prevent that risk that will happen. Okay? So we need to know the different risks, the cause of that risk, why it exists, and how that risk can be prevented. Because a strong internal control is not the aim to cure the defect, but strong internal control is there to prevent the occurrence of that particular risk. Diba ingon nga, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So, that is in a traditional way. Long time ago, according to the management history, ingon sila ng mga financial controller long before, maghuwat ra siya og ang risk mo exist, that will be the time that we have to look for a remedy. But nowadays, considering that there are a lot of things that we can do for a research on how to prevent the risk in advance, because we are now in the era of technological advancement, so they wanted to minimize or eliminate the risk through the research that we have to employ. Okay? So that is why we need to prioritize the risk according to its defect. Mingon ka nga, if this particular risk will happen in the organizations, and this risk, if not be prevented, will be able to determine the big losses. Now, if you prepare what will be the outcome of that particular risk, that would be the time that you know how to counter for that particular risk, and you will be ready all the time. So, you need to arrange. Bring ka nga, napo ka risk ang ahong ma-determine ani nga maong transactions. So, you need to arrange the 10 risks. Kung may ka, asa man ang pinaka higher ka ng defect ani nga maong risk. So, one by one, you need to solve that particular risk. There must be a risk considerations, kumbaga. So, if there is a risk that happen, you need to consider on how you are going to evaluate the nature and types of error or omissions that could occur. What can go wrong, di ba? If that particular error or omission is intentional, well-laid plan of the erring employees, so on and so forth. You need to consider. So, you need also to consider the significant risk error or the significant risks that are common in the industry or have been experienced in the prior years. So you have to look back on the previous records that if this risk is already experienced, see to it that this risk will not happen again. So we need to Di dito mingon nga sometimes raba mingon raba ng mga controller nga we need to forget the past because past is past. You have to understand that past is the continuation of the present and the future. Mao gid na si Jay imong i-consider. Now, how about the information technology risk? Diba? Now, sometimes we are very somewhat like careless with our data na pag ingon wa ka naka-back up, di na ka maka-access. And then, with regards to the security of your data, wa ni mo nahimo. Na sa ato pa, ma-lost na imong data, you will not be able to prepare the correct financial statement. Kay lacking naman imong data, nawa ang imong account receivable, kay gitujo og delete sa manager kay si Zade pinakadakong utang. Diba? Mingon ka nga, ay, I have the access in all the accounts receivable of the company. I need to delete all the data. Aron ma-lost na account receivable, they will not be able to retrieve all the records just because you have 1 million debt in the company. So, dapat you need to understand on how you're going to access, how you're going to have a data integrity. Moment yun ay atong i-consider that every data that you have, there is always a data integrity. And you need to watch out for that risk. Okay? How about the volume, the size, and the complexity, as well as the homogeneity of individual transaction processed through a given account? B. Kay mingon man ka nga homogeneous ang mga data unsa na aday imong nalipatan kay all the data is the same. The same na po kabuok na enter nimo didto walo, so malahi na ang resulta sa imong reporting. Considering the fact that in accounting it is always balance. Even 1 peso or even 1 centavo, you need to locate why there is a difference for that particular figure. Kaya baon naman mo no, the parlance of the accounting in which you need to understand the theory of debit and credit. See to it that what is the figure in the debit, the same figure in the credit. Any difference, you need to work back. Okay. Next, another risk is susceptibility to errors or omission as well as manipulations or loss. Narabay mga cashier nga, they have to initiate a lapping strategy so that they will be able to misappropriate funds. Unsa maning lapping, maingon ka nga, ang collection nimo karong adlaw is 50,000. On the following day, the 50,000 i-deposit na ho sa among depository bank. But with the intention to mislead, with the intention to misappropriate the funds, nangawat siya dito 5,000. Pagpangawat sa 5,000 dito, so 45,000 na laman ang nahibili ni diyang kwarta sa iyang pocket. So, he has to wait for another payment of 5,000 para itapal ni sa 45,000 so that he will be able to deposit the 50,000. So, nagtangag na daan ang 5,000 nga deficit on his cash collection. So, mauna ni Joy inyong banta dyan that there is always a susceptibility to errors and manipulations as well as the manipulations. Kaya daghan naman mga paagi na mga lapping, na mga kiting, the non-issuance of official receipts, the over kanang payment of purchases, so on and so forth. Daghan man lagi nang i-employ ang atong mga erring employees just to misappropriate funds. And that is a big risk. And if that risk cannot be given a correct and proper internal control, it will lead to big losses. So what will happen to the company? Close. And then what will happen to the employees? Mag-sacrifice because all of them will look for another job. And who will suffer? Mauna din ha. Next is the robustness versus subjectiveness of the processes for determining significant estimates. Namalagi mo man nga, they have to resist for change. How about the judgment? Sometimes our judgments is somewhat like different from the judgment of your kind of manager, department heads. And because of the judgment, we'll be able to have a wrong decision making. So this should be for a certain circumstances that you must have to be careful if that will happen. No. So extent of change of business and its expected effects. Malagi mga change in policies. If the change in policies, sometimes it will make a difficulty to some of our employees to handle their own responsibilities, and you have to consider that one, because sometimes if you will be affected with a change of policies, your performance will diminish. There is a possibility somewhat like there's a change in management, and ikaw na hinuon nga kanang kuan long time ago na dugay na employed diha wa ka na kuan, so you will be affected. So that must also be considered. So other risks extending beyond potential material errors or omission in the financial statement. Sometimes, particularly if those error or omissions that has a material effects to the financial statement. Mingon na gani kag material effects, material in the sense that it will affect the company's assets and liabilities. Material in the sense that the money involved or the fund involved is very huge. Dako na siya kaadyo that it will affect the reporting process. Ug miyon kag immaterial, somewhat like mura og it is just only a small amount that it will not affect the reporting. It will not affect the income of the company. You have to remember that one, that miyon kani kag material, big amount that will totally affect the financial reporting of the company. Ug miyon kag immaterial, it is just only a petty amount that can be adjusted, and it has no effect or there is no big deal on the preparations of the financial statement.